Hello, everybody. Welcome to our content marketing tactics unlocked by AI and automation. I'm just going to get started now because we have a ton of material to get through, and I don't know if we're going to be able to make all of it in 45 minutes. So I'm just going to start diving in. Today's agenda, this is why you're all here. We're going to talk about why AI and automation matter for content marketing. We're going to look at behind the scenes use cases with our great guests, Rory, Scott, and myself. Will go through a lot of use cases and the success stories of these use cases. And then we're going to dive into some audience Q&A. Okay, so let's just move on to some introductions. Scott, why don't you start and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. Thanks for taking the time out of the day. My name's Scott. I am the head of content at Clay. Clay is a creative tool for go-to-market professionals. So you can come up with creative demand gen or operations ideas and then implement them. So my role at head of content is helping illustrate what's possible with Clay, doing some more strategic work and co-marketing with different folks, and a handful of other things. So pretty much anything on Clay University or anything on LinkedIn you see on Clay, that is our team. So
Nice.
excited to be here.
Welcome, Scott. And Scott's not mentioning, but recently there's big news with Clay raising $40 million, right? So congratulations to the team there.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. And Rory, our next guest here, really impressive. Why don't you introduce yourself as well?
What's up, everyone? Glad to be here. It's going to be pretty fun trying to get into a lot of things today, but my name is Rory Flynn. I am the founder of Systematiq AI. Essentially, we are what I like to call, just made this up, operational AI company, meaning essentially we just look into people's businesses, we find holes, and then we plug those holes with conventional AI tools. So it's a way for us to look into different team sort of structure, workflows, where can we find little incremental time savings so that, again, we can make everyone a little bit more happy within an organization and not so overburdened by all the tasks that need to get done. So with that, I have a real focus in the creative space where we're doing a lot of things with image generation, video generation, ad creation, email marketing, a lot of things within the digital marketing landscape. But I think we got a lot of good stuff teed up for today, and I'm like really excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it too, Rory. And lastly, I'm Mason. I'm leading marketing at MarketerHire. MarketerHire is a freelance marketplace for connecting top marketers with other companies. And so one of our missions of the marketing team is to just showcase some of the best marketers in the industry and kind of keep everybody updated of the industry trends. And so that's that. So we're going to get started with just like talking about first, like, why do we even care about AI and automation in content marketing? So if we just kind of look at the, this decade versus last decade, or, this beginning of this new decade versus the last decade, we see that there's a lot of changes in how content marketing is thought out. So if we look at 2015, around that time, right, content was very single channel focused, SEO based, very kind of text heavy oriented. And then there was like a more owned media focus where companies kind of had email lists and did a lot of that. And we still exist today, but that's a little less, right? And then longer production cycles for content and marketing owned distribution and predictable search traffic. So Google at that time and other platforms, the algorithms were a little bit more stable, right? And so these days, what we're faced with as content marketers is multi-channels, right? Tons and tons of new channels and tons of different algorithms to figure out. We have a lot of formats that we need to be adept at, video, carousels, podcasts, webinars, for example. And instead of kind of like companies owning their media, there's now like a whole kind of influencer and network driven focus with that kind of distribution. You can see also there's creator-led distribution, and Clay is one of the prime examples of that. With their influencer led kind of like product demos. And then we also have AI assisted workflows, as Rory mentioned, and AI algorithmic volatility, because all of this AI has been disrupting a lot of these channels. The algorithms are a little less stable, that everybody is trying to adapt to this new world. So content, therefore, is just more faster, more distributed, and it's more and more important to be more personalized. And so AI and automation is not really optional anymore. It's kind of key to scaling content production, distribution, and formats effectively. And so winning content strategies really require AI, creators, multi-platforms, and it's not just blogging anymore. Right. And so therefore, some of these challenges that we face, content overload, declining engagement, there's a lot of complexity with multi-platforms. There's shorter attention span now with all the different micro moments that are required to capture user interest. So long form content needs to be kind of converted into a lot of short form snackable content. And then also, even though we need to have AI and automation, AI itself is a double-edged sword, because you can see in this meme here, everybody wants to create AI content, but nobody really wants to consume AI content, right? So that's kind of like this double-edged sword. And so we really need to have, therefore, we need to have marketers that are AI systems enabled, and really kind of proficient and fluent in using these tools to produce their content. Right. And so the best content marketers, they don't use AI. They don't just use AI. They have AI workflows, like going through Clay, for example. And then also kind of this gives a rise, the marketers that are using these tools, they're kind of like the top 1% now, right? And so a lot of these marketers are on the MarketerHire platform. And so just like quick little thing here. I did talk to our head of product to look into our database, and we have approximately 101 marketers as of last week that have AI content and Clay expertise, just ready to kind of help your company. We also just launched a new AI enablement service. You can visit that link on the bottom, marketerhire.com/AI enablement, to help companies build more agents and to integrate AI into their marketing. So just check that out whenever you get a chance. But for now, I've kind of sped through this. We're going to now hand over to Rory to have a awesome crash course on AI-powered content and how he kind of produces this and focuses on video.
Awesome.
So we'll let you just share there.
Thanks, Mason. Let me pull my screen up here. Let's do this real quick. All right. So let's get into this a little bit, right? I got a number of things here, going to rip through it. So hopefully we can everyone can digest this as we go through. But, typically the main tool or the main source of inspiration that I'm using for a lot of the content creation is Midjourney. If you're not familiar with it, it's a powerful image generator, super creative, super visual, has a lot of visual firepower. Currently, I think it's the best of AI when it comes to, being creative and getting some absolutely unique output that's going to give you, a lot more sort of shock value in that sense when you want someone to stop and look at, what you're producing. So really, though, the core content principle of this is if you understand the tool, you're gonna just be much better with it. as dumb as that sounds, but seriously, if you know what works and what doesn't, you can cut down 95% of the prompting and really get to an end goal in a much quicker sort of way. Now, the way that we look at this and the way that I look at a lot of different, this is pretty much universal across most image generators, video generators, anything, from a prompting perspective, really that art, that creative is in the prompt. And if you use something like a clear and direct prompt, you're going to get a clear and direct output. If something is more ambiguous, you're just going to have more random outcomes than a more ambiguous output there. So an example here might be if I just said a photo of a juicy hamburger, you might get something that looks like a McDonald's stock photo, right? That's just very basic. Again, now, if you add more detail to it, you might get something that looks more like an editorial version of a very delicious looking hamburger. So a lot of the devil is in the details here. And sort of again, how do we sort of think about that? How does that come to be? Because, prompting is a sort of an art in its own. Now, we look at this, really the best way to get better at prompting is to essentially understand how these tools work. Now, this works for Midjourney, but this also works for a number of other image generators, right? They're mostly built off diffusion models. So they all kind of function the same way. Think about it like it's a cell phone, right? Everything sort of, every cell phone can call, text, has apps. Really, they might just all have their different intricacies. But realistically, if you know one, you know them all. So really, this is a little exercise I like to play with everyone to figure out how these things work, right? If I say to everyone on this call, just right now, take a quick snapshot in your head, just picture a woman in the park, right? I can guarantee that everyone here has a different image in their head because that statement is ambiguous, right? Like it's all over the place. There's not, what time of day is it? What park is, what is she wearing? All these different factors go into it. Your head created a picture just because you have to, the same way these tools would. Now, the difference is if I said to everyone, picture a woman in a park at night, there's a single spotlight on her. It's in New York City. She's wearing comfy clothes. Everyone's focus just started to narrow down, and we're all much closer collectively to what that image looks like because we added more details, right? So these tools somewhat work in the same way, right? If I just said to something like Midjourney, prompt a woman in the park, you get these various outcomes like different shot types, different seasons, different lighting. Sort of, she's on a bench, she's sitting, on the grass. Again, it's all over the place because that prompt is sort of ambiguous and has a lot of different outcomes. But if we said that same thing, woman sitting in a New York City park at night during a cold winter, wearing cozy clothes, and a single spotlight shines on her, you can see this aesthetic over here is much tighter and we're much narrower in terms of like our focus of our output. So like being intentional with the prompts will get you to a lot better of a place. So like really, if you understand how Midjourney or these tools work, again, I'll reiterate that, it becomes much easier to create. So, essentially at the baseline of it, it starts with training data. Images are uploaded into the system. They get turned into noise. Then you prompt, and then they come back out. Now, think about this as if you're walking down the street in your just daily sort of life, and you're taking all this stimulus and input in. You look at cars, you look at people, you look at the trees. Like that's all getting like you're basically getting training data. It's getting categorized in your memory somewhere. And then when you want to recall that memory, that would essentially be your prompt, and then it's going to spit it back out. It's never 100% as you remember it, correct? Because that's just the way that the mind works. So that's sort of essentially how these things function. Now, when you prompt, you use things, they're called tokens. Now, like physically use tokens, you type them out and the words become tokens. They're like the building blocks of your prompt, right? So each one of these tokens goes, basically when you write a word, Midjourney will go into its brain, or any image generator will go into its brain of things that are, if you type car, it's going to go find all the images that are tagged as car, sort of come up with a whole diffusion of that, and then place it in your image, right? So the thing here with short prompts, when we think about this from a token perspective, right? The less you have, the less tokens you have, the more emphasis you'll have per each token. So if your prompt was like orange Jeep in a snowy environment with, shot on 35 millimeter film, it's basically going to go and, rack its brain to find all the images that are tagged as orange, all the images that are tagged as Jeep, all the images that are tagged as snowy environment, all the images that are tagged with 35 millimeter. And then it's going to just mash sort of that whole idea and concept together, right? To create some sort of, homogenous idea of what this looks like. So really, again, for our visual learners here, again, once you prompt, it's going to go find those tokens, and it's going to go basically create like a mishmash of a scene in its head. Now, when we run that, right, like we get this. So we have our, same prompt. You look at this and the breakdown of how this all looks. Essentially, we look at this over here. We have our orange Jeep, right? That sort of got mashed together. It's essentially like 50% of the image. Over here, we have our snowy environment and more of like that 35 millimeter moody film stock look, right? So this isn't a perfect exact science, just a way to sort of, conceptualize how these things work. Because then when you start going deeper with your prompts, when you start adding more details to it, and have less emphasis per each token. So each one of these little elements is going to show up a little bit less, but you're going to be able to add to your image, right? So if I was to say here, orange Jeep in a snowy environment, New York City, snowman, icicles, spotlight, 35 millimeter film, we've added a lot more, right? Now, when we run that, basically, again, doing the same thing, going into its brain, pulling together an image of just about everything that would be sort of constructed within this composition. So we get our snowman, we get our snowy environment. You can tell it's New York. We have our spotlights here. We have our icicles here at the bottom of the car. And then we have our orange Jeep, so on and so forth, right? So each one of those elements got a little bit smaller, right? Like the Jeep's a little bit smaller than it was in the last image. Snowman is relatively small. The environment, you can tell what's going on. The spotlight is there. It's not necessarily pronounced. So the more you add, the less you get for each one of those elements. Now, what happens when we want to remove stuff? Right? Like just to show you sort of how this whole concept works. If we remove something like snowman and New York City, this is what we get. So we remove snowman, remove New York City. Now, technically, we don't have an environment here. We just have snowy environment. So it makes it up because it has to. You can't have an image without really an environment. So when you think about that, you also look at things like the icicles, because now it's a larger percentage of the token set. They're way more pronounced, so they're much bigger. And that's sort of how this whole thing works with this tokens and diffusing everything together. Once you understand this, you understand that you have more control over the tools. So when I look at this, go into some prompting basics here, check my time. But really, like, I start everything with these kind of simple frameworks in mind. I don't use full sentences because, again, think about each word going into the image generator's brain to pull something out. The more words you have, the more you're just going to kind of pollute the image itself. Think about it like a concentrated version. I like to call it like cranberry concentrate, like instead of the cranberry juice, which is the full watered down version, you bring it all the way down to the concentrated stuff, which is what exactly you want to get out of it. So use things like stronger keywords. We'll separate these keywords by commas. Use powerful language, enormous versus big. Most of the time is going to be something, a little bit better, just like copywriting. Try to focus on a very singular subject. Don't go too far down the rabbit hole of trying to prompt every single little thing in there. And really just tell a story, like the way that you'd set up a scene. That's the best way to think about prompting an image generator. Now, obviously, it's great to have spaceships and all this other cool stuff, but a lot of times we need these things just to look real. The best way to do that is to use photographic terminology. So Midjourney responds very well to photography terminology. And if you are going to essentially break down what is a photograph or what is an image, these are the relative pieces that would be part of an image. Now, if you're just dissecting everything into data, you need all these things to construct what an image actually is. So you have your subject and your action, or your subject and your environment, who's in it, what they're doing, where is it, right? Composition shot type plays a huge role because it's a very different feeling in terms of storytelling for a shot that's close up, and then maybe a drone shot tells a totally different story, right? Mood and emotion, what's going on, how does it make you feel? Specific cameras and lenses, I like to think of this as just a way to provide direction in terms of aesthetic. An iPhone photo looks totally different than a Polaroid, right? Like this can be, make a difference in terms of what you're trying to get out of, the tools. Also things like lighting. There's going to be lighting in every single image, no matter what. If you didn't, it would just be a black void. So the lighting is in there. Color schemes, typically, whether it's black and white or something that's super colorful, there's going to be color in there. And then there's a few other details, modifiers, props, things like that you can utilize. But essentially, that's what makes up an image. So if you know like the requisite parts that make up an image, you can deconstruct an image into data, which is sort of how, it sounds really nerdy, but like this is a way to get good at prompting, because I think about them like visual building blocks. They're interchangeable. You have your photo type, your subject action, color scheme, XYZ. When you put all these things together, we get an image. So therefore, if we're going to create prompts, I'd like to work off a simple structure here where I go, photo type, the shot type, things like that, subject and action, environment, everything that we just took from those visual building blocks, we turn into a singular prompt formula. And then we can just fill it in. This is how it becomes operationalized. This is how you can build it across teams. This is how you can make things very, you don't have to prompt endlessly to try and figure things out. Once you have things broken out by category here, also you can iterate. So if the lighting's not great and you don't like it, you put the lighting in there so you can go change it. If I don't like this super, bright midday lighting, let me turn it to like a evening light, things like that. So you can really then iterate quicker. Again, we're all about incremental time savings here. So if we're going to use a simple prompt here, right? We have cinematic still, we have a haggard man sitting, grungy East Village dive bar, brown and burgundy colors, 35 millimeter film, backlight, meaning it's coming from behind the subject, off balance composition, meaning someone's shifted a little bit outside the center of the frame. And then we have our loneliness is our emotion, right? We'll run it. Again, probably could use a really much more exciting example, but just want to show sort of the details when people think they don't have control over these images. You really do. It's just you have to cover your bases. So cinematic still, right? We get that cinematic vibe to it. Grungy East Village dive bar is the environment. If you haven't been there, is exactly what it looks like in New York. So you have like, your chips on the wall, your chips on the bar. Looks like there's probably some dust on some of those bottles. 35 millimeter film, a little bit more analog feel, brown and burgundy. You have the brown coat, you have the red walls back here, that comes through. You have this haggard old man sitting with off balance composition. We get all of that. He's not perfectly centered. He's justified to the right a little bit. We have backlight coming in from this light back here, from this window back here, and loneliness, we get that emotion. So because we're covering our bases, we can get what we need. And again, now that we know this, maybe I don't like brown and burgundy. Maybe I want yellow and brown instead. You know where to go and iterate, which is just as important as, dreaming up the prompt itself. So, that being said, like how we take these visual building blocks and then apply it, right? Like we like to call this asset hacking. So when we talk about asset hacking, what that is essentially like we would take images from our brands, like break them down and then rebuild them out. So if we had campaigns that were local, we could turn them global because we could take the aesthetic of an image, turn into many different things, right? So essentially that's how we would break things down into data. For a more visual example of that, something like a Red Bull image here, we would take this image, we'd turn it into text. So we could have these visual building blocks aligned. We know how to describe this image in every little particular detail. And then instead of just being a Red Bull, race car, which might be the only asset we have, we can turn it into a motorcycle. We can turn it into a race, into a dune buggy, into a dirt bike, things like that. So it allows us to just expand our assets, which again, if everyone is, in this content space here, we all know you can get low on assets very quickly. So that's the way that we've been able to utilize for things like ads, email marketing, content in general. So it's not the same old same old images all the time. We can continuously iterate into infinity. Now, again, something like that, you might never know the difference, which is great. That's what we're going for, because that's, again, something that if we're using our own brand assets, even better. Now, the same theory applies when we go further into video, right? We look at these visual building blocks, everything's essentially the same. The X factor here is the motion, because you're now working, instead of this 2D flat image, you're working in 4-dimensional space. So the two things here to notice are, that are different is just the camera motion, camera direction, subject action, subject motion. That's really the difference. Everything else is the same. You're going to have an environment, a mood and atmosphere, a lighting, a style, shot type, things like that, right? That all comes into play. So when you're looking at structuring prompts, we look at it pretty much the same way, except we're focusing heavily on the motion of the camera and the motion of the subject. So we have our shot type, subject and details, camera motion and direction, atmosphere, captured in the style. Like that's a simple prompt formula. We fill it in, and then we can go from there. And again, iterate, because we know we're covering our bases, right? So when I look at something like this, if we broke the prompt down, seems really long. It's really not that crazy. We have our cinematic pushing in shot, man drinking from a can of soda in front of a camel. Got it, right? The camera pushes in close up, past the man's hand, to focus directly on the camel's face, right? Here we go, happening right now, showing the intricate texture of the camel's fur, which is what we want, while its mouth is making a chewing motion, right? Like we get all of that exactly how we asked for it, because we're directing it in the way that it understands, how to compose a video. So things like that, again, just cutting down on your prompting, super helpful, because when you want to push towards what happens next, which is automation, once you have these structures and formulas in place, things become much more easy to apply, sort of agents to them, because you have an operating structure on how to create. So we've now built a system, myself and the team at Superside, working on how do we take a brief and turn that into a fully curated ad or post within Figma. So it goes from one place to the next, multiple processes, multiple sort of systems that are integrated into this, so that you can essentially custom train your own SaaS tool, if that makes sense. Why though? Because there's 500 clients to get serviced. We need speed and precision to get there. And really the idea is to get there to the first draft in 24 seconds versus 24 hours. So if we can go from a brief to a first draft, that means our designers can take over, work on something that we already know is, objectively on brand based on building these systems off data. And then they can go, and also working off of performance metrics and data of that nature, knowing that this is something that will potentially or has a high probability of working. So again, they can put their creative human spin on it versus like trying to get everything on brand and getting that over to our clients and moving that along a lot quicker, right? So really the way that we do this, I need like 6 hours to talk about it, but just a sort of high level overview is really we're building everything off of knowledge graphs. So basically a very detailed plan of how a brand looks, feels, acts, and then also some performance data baked in to have some reference against. Then we have our agents to execute tasks. Then we have integrations sort of to connect all the agents. And then we use, universal language JSON for coding, because everything can sort of speak that and we can connect everything together. So when we put it together, the system, because we understood how to break everything down, you take this one whole piece, you break it down into its requisite parts, then we can rebuild it back into whatever we want. So essentially we brief. When that brief runs, it goes to a number of agents. You might have a copy agent that's going to write copy, an image generator that's going to generate images. You have a performance agent that's going to go look at all the previous data and say, like, this is what works, this is what doesn't. Then we're also going to have a template generator for, this is for, meta ads, things of that nature, where it's going to go read all of the sort of data that we've put in there in terms of like what templates work, what don't. It's all math and kerning and things of that nature. So essentially it'll go, these agents will reference against the knowledge graph. Let's just say it was a random company like the HelloFresh, like all of that information would be in there. It would come back. Each agent separately runs their own job, copy, images, performance, and then templates. Once they've done their individual job, we send them to an agent that codes them all to, codes them all into JSON, which we then send to another pretty agent who basically combines everything and packages it up into a nice sort of structured format to then send over to Figma, which receives it and does the development of the actual creative. So everything can be broken down. And that's really how, to think about, I think the most useful thing in terms of like, how do we use these tools and use them effectively is like break everything into data, because that's essentially what everything is. Then you can rebuild it however you want. So that's really my little spiel. I wish I had a little bit more time to go into the agent stuff. It is very complex, but I think that's going to be the future, as we're all starting to see. So let me stop my share here and pass it back to everyone else.
Yeah, Rory, this is amazing. I'm sure that everybody's thinking the same thing. I really love the almost like the engineering approach to prompting and to AI and like content marketing in a way. And then it's almost like content marketers. I mean, what do you think about this? Like, do you not kind of think like content marketers? It's almost like the content that we write, it's almost like just as important to write good content for that AI prompt in a way, like to design that system rather than just creating the content that's going to be publicly available. It's like almost like content marketers are like the inside agents of creating that whole system. Maybe can you elaborate a little bit more about where you think humans kind of fit into this?
It's still storytelling, right? I still think that's the main part of it. If you can tell stories and you understand how to develop an angle, especially for something, a content piece that's going to be, super interesting, it's not just the ability to go create whatever you want, it's the ability to tie it together. So how do I tie an image and words together, right? Like to make it actually fit. I think that's a superhuman skill in its own. I've tried to do something like that with ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. It still sort of misses the point in terms of like, there's not that human level marketing to it where it's like, I know this is what someone else will see, make this interpretation and sort of deliver. So there is the human skill set that's involved. And I still think that that's like, I use this all the time. I don't think an accountant can jump onto Midjourney and be a graphic designer, right? I think a graphic designer can jump onto Midjourney and be an exceptional graphic designer. Like the area of expertise and the knowledge is there to be really good at it. The same way I don't think, someone who's not a copywriter is going to write exceptional copy with an AI bot, attached to it. You can still go in there, take it 70% of the way, edit it, rework it, iterate it. It's not just going to be like, let's push a button first thing that comes out. So yeah, I could do a dissertation on that, I think, in terms of my opinion, but
it's almost like, like when you it's like, oh, the photography language is like, oh, like anybody who's not a photographer wouldn't be able to be as detailed because they hadn't thought about all those elements that are important.
Yeah,
right. So
totally.
We're basically going to go over some practical examples. So I can give a quick backstory. We spend a lot of time thinking, how can we think and act a little differently at Clay within our marketing team? And there's certain things that we've invested in. We've invested in influencer-led distribution. We've invested a lot into educational content. And one of the areas that we felt light, but there's an interesting opportunity right now, is all of this AI content, right? And specifically not text, but images and video. So we started hunting and we found Rory's profile. And we were like completely fell in love. We started sharing Rory's profile on Slack. We're like, oh my gosh, we have to talk to this guy and we have to work with him. And so what Mason's pulling up are a couple practical examples that we just built and shipped using some of these tools he recommends, like Midjourney or Suno or Minimax and Runway and 11 Labs. So yeah, just to share a little bit of context, these are practical examples that we shipped just to get the ball rolling. And they're in no shape or form the greatest examples that are out there, but we believe we should be investing now in order to get us in a good place by the end of the year. That if we just keep putting out repetition after repetition of this video content where we're using these AI tools, we'll be thankful we did at the end of the year. So that's sort of what we're putting some energy into.
It is with great honor and pleasure that I'm honored to announce that Clay, B2B's golden child, has raised $1 million.
No, they didn't, you idiot.
All right, zip it.
No, if you're gonna say it right.
Zip.
It's 40
Look, I'm Zippy Longstockings.
$40 million preemptive
When a
series.
problem comes along, you must zip it. Zip it good.
It's a $40 million preemptive.
Okay, Mason, that's fine. Just to sort of illustrate the point. So to make this, we used Runway. So Runway has a feature called Act 1 where you can do lip syncing. And so if you see Scotty from Dr. Evil, you can tell it's AI. Clearly it's like AI generated and it's not perfect. And, it's meant to be a parody and nothing too serious. But we just did a huge fundraising round and we said, what can we do that's a little bit different? And Obed on Clay's team said, well, what if we spin up a fake Dr. Evil profile? And that scene in Austin Powers when him and Scotty are going back and forth, and we make that, but we use 11 Labs for the audio overdubbing, and we use Runway's Act 1 for the lip sync. And so we just were like, oh, that's an interesting, novel, kind of funny idea. Let's try it. And so we would work with Rory. We also work with Todd Klauser, who's a freelancer, who's unbelievable, to ship this. So one practical example.
Do you want to do one more, Scott? Which one?
Yeah,
would you
sure.
prefer?
It's our enrichment program. We can load anything that your ops team sets up, from contacts, company research, 10K summaries, anything your rep needs.
Right here? I don't even have to leave Salesforce.
Is it really so hard to believe?
Okay, so same thing. We had a huge feature launch, and you have the ability to run enrichments and research inside of Salesforce with the click of a button. So one way to announce it is a typical product launch, where you can either have a high production value or low production value, but it's all storytelling around the product. And we said, what can we do that's different, right? And so kind of came up with this. Todd and Obed on the team came up with this concept that they called the Claytrix of what if, we take this scene from Morpheus in the Matrix and then play it out in this announcement video. So we have a different way to make product announcements that are more fun and engaging and playful than what you would typically see.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's pretty awesome and really fun videos. And it's I think again, it kind of brings the point of I feel like where content marketers sit is that storytelling part, and where can you guys make something different? And also I feel like having good taste too, and also understanding what the pop culture is and understanding movies and videos. I think yeah, so great. I love that. So the next thing I just wanted to share from Marketer Hire's side, and also kind of as a difference from what Rory and Scott just shared, which is video and image generation, and we can kind of also apply the same types of thinking that Rory brought in his AI workflow setup for text content generation. So I'm going to share two quick use cases. So programmatic SEO, for those of us that don't really know it, it's basically Marketer Hire sells 12 different types of marketers, but people search for marketers in many different ways. And so programmatic SEO is a way for us to use many different, use many different types of marketing job titles to kind of capture the demand that people are searching on Google. So for example, a social media manager could be an influencer marketing manager as well, that people might be searching directly influencer marketing manager, right? Or maybe a Reddit marketer is actually a social media manager, but people might be searching specifically for a Reddit marketer, right? And so in content marketer, people might be searching for a head of content marketer. So programmatic SEO and using AI and the workflows that we talked about with Clay is like a way to be able to enable marketers to do this at scale with the type of kind of diffusion and breaking down the concepts and then productionizing it. So if I were to just kind of go to here, this is Clay's backend. We have a bunch of different fractional CMO keywords that people might be searching on Google. And we want to create different content for every single industry and use case, right? So an example of this is like fractional CMO for the cryptocurrency industry, right? So like let's say like a crypto app wants to hire a fractional CMO, they might actually specifically look for fractional CMOs with that kind of experience. And so with us having visibility of this page and having this page live, we're able to rank on Google for crypto fractional CMO, right? And so, you can see all this different types of companies that we can rank for fractional CMOs. But the way we're using AI here is that, first of all, we have formulas that construct, so that can kind of come together, almost like how Rory did the prompt formulas. We can leverage the prompt formulas and then create a master prompt for every single type of use case, right? So if we kind of look here at this here, this type words here represents this area here. We have basically enabled one of the different prompt formulas that is going to return a valid JSON, and then another system prompt here with examples. And so what happens in the AI output, and this is going into the weeds a little bit with what Rory was saying, is that we're able to create a response that has extracted different types of type words that are related to that combination of fractional CMO and cryptocurrency, for example. And so these are the 6 different ways that the page here is looping through, and we're able to kind of personalize every single one for a different use case that's slightly different, right? And so I'm not going to go too into details, but that's one way you're able to create content at scale and personalize at a more massive level, is by breaking down every single component of this page. So kind of similar to what Rory mentioned in the image generation decomposition, we're going through and thinking about the content framework and what are the different elements of each content aspect, and breaking it down, and then how do we infuse fractional CMO and cryptocurrency related topics into this page, and then generating a whole landing page with these fields here. So that's one use case. Scott, why don't you go to the next one?
So yeah, like we were saying, we invest a lot into influencer marketing at Clay. And so wanted to provide an example of how you can do this in your market or your industry if you do want to get in front of different influencers. So I spend a lot of time thinking about and just chipping away at different climate tech initiatives. This one is pretty interesting. So imagine you are looking for people that would be clean energy influencers. So they talk a lot about solar or wind or things like that publicly. And so what you would typically do historically is look up clean energy influencers. You get these lists that look like this. You start saving them into spreadsheets. You go to the next one, you do the same thing, you remove duplicates. So what you can do using Clay is actually, you can basically automate this exact search. So you can go in and type clean energy influencers, and then what it will return is each one of these rows is a Google result. So you see the top one is Agility PR Solutions. This is Agility PR Solutions. Then what it does is it reads that website, this specific link, And then it looks for all of the people that are actually mentioned here. So if I go back to Agility PR Solutions, you see Naomi and Catherine Hayho. And I pull down the JSON, you can see Naomi and Catherine Hayho. Then what we do is we take every single article and then we write it to another table. And basically how this works is it says, hey, take everyone's name and company and just make it a new row in another table. So that's what we do here. So this column and this column is basically an automated Google search that pulls in everyone's name and everyone's company as they would be appearing on various websites. Then we run what's called an enrichment in Clay. And so if I take, just cherry pick a random one, this will have all of their information, and then we can add what country they're in, how many followers they have, anything along those lines, which can then, we can run what's called a waterfall to find their email. So I'm just kind of picked, I think I had Mike Bloomberg in here as someone who popped up, which is kind of funny. But you have Mike Bloomberg who popped up here, and we say, okay, try and get Mike's email and run it through a series of enrichments. And so it goes boom, boom, boom. It checks all of these different providers and then ultimately gives you the output here. We say, okay, cool. Well, now that we got a list of everyone, how many followers they have, and we have their personal email, let's say we're doing a webinar. And this webinar is, hey, we're hosting a webinar on clean energy storage. We'd love to have you on as a guest. Write a first draft of an email for us. And so then it will write, kind of the first draft of the email. And typically we actually wouldn't recommend doing that. We recommend writing the email yourself and using personalization tokens, but just to show a practical example. And then one last thing is that we ran another research prompt that says, hey, go see if they have a newsletter and if they do, or a podcast, just tell us what that is. And then it will return with, yes, this person does have a podcast. It has all of the links. I didn't actually clean up this table yet, but then what you can do is say, okay, now give me the specific link, and you can reference the link in the emails and whatnot. So a lot of cool stuff you can do for finding influencers, which we actually use Meta at Clay. We use Clay at Clay quite a bit. And this is one pretty cool use case that you can use or leverage for any market that you're in. Cool. I'll just do one last one to round it out. Rory spent a lot of time on image creation. This is, I think, vastly underrated. So when you're working on any type of creative, typically if you're writing an article and you need images, you want to be able to create images that feel like the brand. And so we use a tool called Visual Electric to do that. And here you can write a prompt. So this article is about basically flipping the concept of a sales demo on its head, and you get someone to use the product live on a Zoom call versus you're showing them how the product works. So that's the gist of the article. And the analogy is, imagine like when you're learning how to drive a car, you don't just sit in the passenger seat and someone lectures you on how to drive the car. You drive the car and someone teaches you as you go. And with sales demos, that's not really how it works. So like, well, let's just generate some image for what that could be. So he said passenger in a car shouting at the person driving the car on a deserted highway in the sunset. And so it can pull things out in the style that we have specifically here, which looks like this. And so we can write anything we want and it will output something that looks close. So it's very similar to Midjourney. And why this matters, and how I think anyone can apply it who's in a content function, is historically it was really hard to scale the creative minds of your brand team or your designers. And now we have this ability to get close enough for something, and then they can always make additional edits from there. But yeah, just the world that we're in right now is so fascinating.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Just wrapping up, we have a couple more minutes left. I just wanted to give a quick plug for next 2 weeks from now. We're going to have our final bootcamp series with Clay on focusing on outbound sales tactics. So we're going to have Eric, Petra, and Jacob here going to be talking about outbound sales and a little bit more similar to kind of what Scott mentioned, his influencer outreach and email, something like that, where you're kind of going outbound. And so we have a couple of audience Q&A questions. Let me just kind of check which ones might be relevant, because I think this first question, do you have tips for prompting? This is, I think Rory has kind of addressed this a lot. Now, okay, this is an interesting question I want to ask you guys. Now that AI can handle basic writing tasks and even basic image, right, and basic video, what quality should we look for when hiring a content marketer? And then how can I find the best talent?
To me, this has always been like marketer centric, right? Like if the execution pieces are the writing and the the curation of the visuals, but really it's like, how do we understand a problem? Do we understand how to really speak to that problem? So to me, I've always been, when I'm hiring people too, especially from on the marketing side, content marketing side, it's like, can you actually tie an idea together with a problem that is cohesive enough? Because I think it's, as intangible as that seems, it's really the entire thing. Can you distill a complex sort of idea down to something very simple that's digestible? Oftentimes that's another thing I look for too. When we're hiring content marketers, how clearly can you communicate at a digestible level? Like there's certain things, me trying to explain how to decompose an image and then rebuild that back out, that's the only way I'd know how to do that is if I spent hours trying to do it and figure it out. I couldn't just come up with that idea off the top of my head and then just say like, yeah, this is how we do it. We're going to break it down. It's basically like, we're going to create a nice analogy where it's a pizza. If you break pizza down into ingredients, you have dough, sauce, cheese, right? Like those are the essential ingredients. But if you, reformat it and cook it a different way, it's a calzone, right? Like it's the same sort of idea of what I'm talking about. But for someone to have the ability to break that down and then be able to build it back out or just to tell it in a digestible way, I think that sort of mastery is really a skill that I would look for personally, in terms of storytelling. So that's, I think it always comes back to storytelling in some way, shape, or form. But
Scott, what about you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business. Like the first thing that I think about is who's in the market, and then what's the model of your business. So, for example, if you are trying to get in front of CFOs and your average deal size is $90K annually, then what you invest in with content marketing should be quite a bit different. I'll take another B2B example. Then if you are going after designers for let's call it like a PLG product, that's $100 to $200 per month, right? Because it just fundamentally depends on who they are and also where they're hanging out. And then you can start to figure out what medium matters. So should I invest in video? Well, does your market watch video that's related to what this concept is? I give a practical example from many, many years ago. Prior to working at Clay, I worked at HubSpot. In around 2014, we had a Chrome extension that turned into an idea of, wait, what if we create a free CRM and attempt to disrupt Salesforce on the bottom end of the market? And so we started working on that product, and then that product has grown quite a bit since then. But with that, we're like, okay, content marketing. Who do we want to get in front of? Salespeople. Okay, great. Let's create content about sales. Salespeople don't read content about sales. They just, it's not like there was a mismatch here. So it really, really depends. I'm genuinely not trying to throw out a softball answer. It so much depends on who's your market and what the model is. And like for us, for example, a core segment within Clay are agency owners. Agency owners live on LinkedIn. They produce a lot of content on LinkedIn. And so they want to look better than the agency owner that would be next to them. And so now how can we help enable them to create really cool, interesting content in a way that helps them scale their business? Right. And so just like, okay, now we know what are the qualities we should look for in a content marketer because we have confidence on who's our market and what is our model. and what content works well on LinkedIn. Video works well on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where our audience hangs out. Let's invest there.
Nice. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And if I may just add too, I think, these days, especially with, on top of those qualities you just mentioned, and especially with AI and like automation and all this scaling, for me, like what I think is important for a content marketer is detail oriented, because a lot of stuff can happen wrong with AI, right? When, I'm sure, Scott, when you guys were publishing those videos on Clay, if another content team had created it with less detail oriented, right? Like there could probably be a lot of mistakes that kind of went through, or just like also like kind of good taste in a way, right? Like that kind of video, bordering the, maybe, if it went one way or the other, it could have been not a great video, or not a viral one that represents your company well. Yeah, I think that's like one other thing I would add to all of that. I have a couple. I think we have 3 more minutes. How do you manage I have a question from Patricia. I'm going to start with her. How do you manage the human input versus AI input / output? Like, how do you manage that system, I guess?
I can go first on this one, I guess. So the other day I was talking to a friend who works in film. I live in Los Angeles, don't work in film, but have friends that do. And I was like, what's up with AI? You have products like Runway, you have Lionsgate starting to work with Runway, and where do you see job risk happening? And he said, it's actually concept artists. So it's people that are coming up with sketches and concepts and like getting the first drafts and getting over the hump, which then you have other people finish it. My personal take on where we're at currently with whether they're video tools, text tools, image tools, it's like Rory said, it's not 24 hours, it's 24 seconds. You get to a concept so fast. Even using Claude projects, I spun up a landing page within 3 minutes that had interactive elements using the Claude project, and I'm not a developer. And so it's getting over the hump really fast. And that's where we use AI to get to a concept. Then the human element comes in, and you're really editing whatever it is. You're editing the video, you're editing the image, you're editing the text, you're editing the code. But we can all get to concepts way faster. I think that's the beauty of where we're at right now.
Great answer.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, I think it's mostly a bionic piece of your tool set, right? Like I like to utilize that sort of example because the reason I started using it within our business was essentially we just overworked and really underproducing in terms of like the volume that was necessary, and not a bad way. It just like, from a sense of the volume that's needed, multi-channel, multi-format, right? Like consistently, especially on the digital ad side, where we're running so much creative, it's insane. And a lot of it's not working. So you got to flip this stuff out consistently. So how do we put tools in the hands of talented people that are already talented, right? I think it's an amplifier. I think it's a force multiplier for people. Like I said, I think it will be able to help things like, like Scott just said, where you might not be able to code, but now you have, a partner in this that can actually get you somewhere. At least if you then wanted to go take it to another developer to polish it off, it's already, it's half done. Not saying that's great for the developer, but really, I think you can look at it as a way to amplify the things that you're already good at, and the way, where your team is already good, because now they just have more options. Like I, talked to, as a quick story, went to a production house the other, 3 days ago, professional photographers, professional cinematographers, professional designers, really high leverage brands that they're working on. Once they understood that the language that they have to speak to these tools is exactly the language they've always used, and that they can control the outputs and be more, really creative within the boundaries of what they already know. People were in the back like pacing, like, what? Why was I not using this? So I think it's really, for people who find tools that match their skill sets, their roles, things like that, take them, run with them, and I think you're going to find that you're way better at the tools just at the starting block than you might have thought. It's really just to get in there, get your feet wet, because it's the best advice I can give to anyone. Play around, because you'll find stuff that you never knew you were good at.
Yeah, the age of marketers hacking, hackathons for marketing, as I say.
Oh my God,
it's here now. So we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much, Scott and Rory. You guys have been unbelievably amazing. Thanks for sharing all of your work. Everybody, thanks for being here until 12 or wherever you are for that whole hour. Have a great one.